Hello, and welcome back to week 6. So we are now coming into the midpoint of the course. And today we'll talk about intervention strategies. But first, so quiz 3 grades are mostly back. Not everyone has written the test yet, so these averages might change a little. We had the usual range of D to A+. There was a 3% increase in the mean score from quiz 1 to quiz 2. And now there was an 8% jump from quiz 2 to quiz 3, and all with the same standard deviation of 13%. And what that suggests to me, so one possible interpretation, is that your quiz taking skills are developing with practice. And a couple of people have given me some feedback, so I didn't write like really super long ass questions, and folks got their accommodation aligned. So these seem to be having positive effects, though I will say that anything over a 60 makes me happy. And I know sometimes there's a pressure to excel, and in an organizational situation, you might hear that you should be as productive as possible, but I'm more of a satisficer. So if everyone's over that 60, then I'm very happy, but it is nice to see you getting these high scores. Again, those who wrote the practice quiz seem to benefit from it, which is interesting because I don't look at the practice questions before I go and write the test questions. But it does seem to make a difference. I anticipate releasing feedback later this week, and I will let you know when that is available. I have had to adjust membership because of a couple of withdrawals. So there's now 10 students in the class, so I had to make one team of 4. I have created a team assignment folder on Brightspace, so you can find the link to the intervention from last year there. I just heard from Gail today, confirming that she will be here to deliver it in person on the 25th. But if you wanted to, you could look at last year's one in order to say, maybe ask her questions. I don't know, it is there. I am working on the rubric, and I will get that out to you as soon as I can. There will be a peer evaluation component, and this is something that I learned in grad school. I know they use it in the MPA program and the MBA program. And so I'll ask you guys to rate each other on engagement or contribution. And if your teammates were present and there and ready to do their bit, doesn't mean they never made mistakes, doesn't mean you never got mad at each other. But if they were engaged and they were there and they pulled their weight, then give them 100%. And let's say you got an A on your paper, it was 85, then they would get an 85 on that. But now imagine if there's someone in your team that just plays dead, okay? And they never answer your emails, and they never show up for meetings, and they don't write a word, okay? That would be like a true 0. And then if you multiplied their 85% by 0, well, then they wouldn't get credit for that. So I will send that all out to you. Today, I will talk about intervention strategies. That's chapter 7. This was a short reading. I only have about 20 slides, so I anticipate finishing in about 20 minutes. And so there'll be time after that if you guys would like to chat. Here's the first line of chapter 7. I'm going to disagree with that immediately. So their opening sentence is, organizational change attempts to increase organizational efficiency. And yes, that is true to a point, but I want to contextualize and qualify that because that's just very simplistic. Organizational change attempts to increase organizational efficiency. Organizations often implement change programs for reasons that are about the bottom line, right? That are about survival and efficiency. Ideally, the best change program would fix whatever the problem is, and it would imbue the organization with these democratic, humanistic values, and it would also increase efficiency and effectiveness. In practice, you often can't have it all. So in practice, organizational change programs might not increase efficiency. So maybe they're ineffective or they make things worse. That can happen. A change program can be iatrogenic. And I'm going to to write this word down because I know it's going to be a fill-in-the-blank question on some quiz. I don't know which one yet. Iatrogenic. We often assume that if we have some program, if we do something, that it will make things better. And really, sometimes it can make things worse. And even if your change program is nearly ineffective, even if it just doesn't make anything worse, you still spent time and money on it. Okay, so it was still wasteful. So, harmful, iatrogenic. Genic causes harm. Also, change programs can be about more than the bottom line. So an intervention to reduce employee stress might make the organization less efficient because people aren't working at a breakneck speed anymore. But you might think that's worth it anyway. So efficiency might not be the highest value for every manager and every organization. It certainly is the highest value for many managers, but not all. So initiatives to improve diversity often lead to a reduction in productivity, but maybe diversity and inclusion are social goods that are valuable in their own right. Maybe this leads to some long-term benefit. Right? Efficiency isn't the only worthy goal. When you have a group of people that are really like-minded, let's say they're all from the old boys clubs, they'll get along pretty easily, and then they can be very productive and efficient in making lots of widgets, but I don't know, maybe there's some long-term harm associated with that. Okay, so efficiency is one goal, it's a very important goal, but it's not the only worthy goal. Sometimes change programs happen for legal reasons. So for example, to get the organization in compliance with some existing or some new legislation. So the Accessibility Act has come out, and now higher education institutions are scrambling to get accessibility committees and accessibility officers. Okay, students with disabilities existed in the system before that, and they had accessibility needs before that. But the organization wasn't responsive to that, wasn't really responsive until legislation came around, and then you have to get in compliance with that. And doing that might make the organization less efficient, but the law is a higher value that ideally represents the higher common good. Also, it'll help the organization get sued less in the long term, okay? Or not lose whatever registration it needs in order to continue to operate. And you could call that a matter of efficiency at some higher level. My clicker just sometimes does not cooperate. The textbook included some jokes about organizational inefficiency that I appreciated. So these are Parkinson's laws of organizational inefficiency. And one is that work will expand to fill the time available for its completion. So if you give yourself a lot of time to study for your quiz, you will just use all that time. And sometimes you spend that time doing things that you don't need to do. Right? There's a point that more is not better. Right? There's a point at which the returns associated with doing more work are very small, and really you should be doing something else. Number 2 is the law of the multiplication of subordinates. In many organizations, managers have little empires, little fiefdoms, and they control their subordinates. And now imagine if you have too many subordinates and some of them are disgruntled and you just don't have time to manage them all. You don't have time to care about them all. Well, wouldn't the best thing for the organization and the employee and for you be to let somebody else manage that person? Well, then they will become the denizen of a rival empire, and you will give another lackey to another manager. And sometimes managers don't want to do that. So they might choose to increase the number of subordinates they supervise past the point that they can supervise them properly and well, because they don't want to create rival organization members by allowing that person to work for somebody else within the same organization. And then there is the law of the multiplication of work. So when you have people in an organization, they interact with each other, they make work for each other. Things get complicated. So those are jokes, but they're quite true in practice. So they say that the starting point for a change program is the definition of a total change strategy. And I've noticed that they're using some terms that sound similar, but actually mean different things. And those are the terms, where's my eraser here? Oh, this is getting dry. OD program is a term they use. Program. And then they use the term change program. And they also use the term intervention. So an OD intervention. So last week, we learned that the OD program starts with diagnosis, and now we're hearing that the change program starts with strategy. Where do you start? I think that what's going on here is that the term OD program refers to the entire cyclical OD process, whereas the term change program is more specific. So maybe you could have more than one change program as part of an overall OD program in an organization. And then the interventions are the actual activities that you're conducting with people in the organization. So let's say that you do some kind of a, those blindfolded zip line team development interventions. So a team development activity, like I'll have you do in about a month or a couple of weeks, would be an intervention. Could be part of a change program. It's part of an overall OD program. So change programs and the interventions that are part of them shouldn't be haphazard. They should be guided by some kind of larger strategy, larger vision, a plan that integrates all these different activities towards accomplishing the objectives of, more specifically, the change program, and at the broadest level, the OD program in the organization. And ultimately, the objectives of the change program are to correct the problems that you identified in the diagnosis. And this is how you're going to do it with your intervention. The textbook uses a certain classification system for change strategies. And sorry, are you guys getting any sound from me? Oh yes, sorry, my little green audio bar disappeared and I see that my microphone is indeed still working. Back to the lecture. Okay, so the textbook uses a certain classification system for change strategies, and it classifies the strategies as structural, behavioral, or technological. It's not a great classification system, but it's useful to some extent. A really good classification system has mutually exclusive categories. So let's say blue is a color and 2 is a number, and a number can't be a color, and a color can't be that's a good taxonomy. But these aren't mutually exclusive. They're interconnected and overlapping, so that can get a little bit confusing. So that said, they're different lenses, and you should be thinking about all three, because historically, OD practitioners overemphasize the behavioral strategies, the team development activities that are about how we relate together, right? That kind of thing. And we forget to think about structure, and we forget to think about technology. So it's good to keep these in mind so that we don't naturally go into overemphasizing the behavioral stuff and neglecting the other important ones, because they do interconnect. And so you can't just neglect structure and technology. So first, let's go over the 3 types of strategies. So structural approaches, structural strategies refer to strategies that target the structural subsystem. That subsystem refers to the org chart, the formally defined and articulated organizational design. You see that in the org chart, in the policies and the procedures that are written up somewhere, right? You can go look them up and find them. So common strategies are restructuring and downsizing. changes can move towards centralization. So centralization is when all the decisions are made by headquarters, and decentralization when all the decisions are made by teams on the ground. Those are extremes. And it's not that centralization is bad and decentralization is good. OD tends to like decentralization. Really, it's about what's adaptive, what helps the organization deal with its environment. Depending on context and circumstances, more centralization could be adaptive. With different contexts and circumstances, decentralization might be more adaptive. But I don't want you to think that one is bad and one is good. I'm trying to move away from that towards an adaptivistic lens. Technical strategies refer to the technical subsystem, and that's about the primary functions, activities, and operations, including the techniques and equipment that are used to produce the output of the system. So in this course, me pontificating, blah, 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 okay, what I'm doing right now, or the technical subsystem. And so is this Zoom setup and that camera, yes, and this board and those chairs and you and that, this is all the technical subsystem. And we're using it in order to move forward the primary good, which is you getting this course credit. So that includes the hardware and the software and the furniture and the virtual Zoom rooms and the brick and mortar of buildings. So a technical strategy could include updating the computer hardware, software, getting the latest and the greatest in technology, maybe training me to use it so I don't have to call a guy every single time. And since it's about the primary functions and operations of the organization, it also includes job design. So job design refers to the way that a set of tasks or an entire job is organized. And that's not just about what you do. It's not just about the number of courses I teach and what they are. If we looked at this example of McDonald's, it can refer to things like kind of workflow and to how the environment is actually designed. So in this McDonald's example, there's a lot of thought behind like where they put the fryer and where they put the drinks, right? And how close that is to the person that's on the cash and how many steps they have to go over here and how many steps back. Right? They think about that. And so you've noticed some changes, I'm sure, and now customers are the ones that pour their own drinks and ring up their own orders and process the payment. I never thought that would happen. But I get my order right. Behavioral approaches to change are about mobilizing people. People are your human resources. And this is what OD has traditionally focused on and what it tends to overemphasize. So the behavioral approaches are about getting people to participate. It's about motivating them, boosting their morale, and getting their buy-in. So it's things like employee engagement and team development. The problem with over-focusing on this is that people's behavior reflects a system and a structure. And your strategy needs to recognize and incorporate that. So you might recall that I pointed out how in a previous chapter, employees who don't care and share with the OD practitioner were assumed in a way that was actually a little contemptuous to be people who fail to take personal responsibility for their behavior. Right? That attitude is so blind to the person's interaction with the system and the forces that are on the person that come from system and structure. And what are they being rewarded for? What are they being punished for? What can they say in front of whom? It's just, that was a really good example of OD trying to do this behavioral strategy of, oh, let's kind of talk about stuff and just totally not seeing the system and the structure. So it was a beautiful example and they even did it in the book. So an effective OD strategy needs to take a wider system view. Right? You need to think about structure and you need to think about power. And we also often forget to think about the technical subsystem. So OD itself, organizational development, is a field that is about process. And I don't think the book explained this very well. I thought it was a little bit confusing. So what I did here is I gave you the Virgin textbook publisher slide that says things like determining feature of OD strategy is process used to arrive at strategy. And then I added my thoughts in red. So when they say, let's look at the first bullet, structural, technological, and behavioral strategies are not OD change strategies per se. So a strategy is not a philosophy, and OD is a philosophy. It's a way of doing things. And so it's OD once you have that at the back of your mind and you're doing it in that intentional way. So a team development activity is not OD if you're just like, oh, we have some money in the budget and we'll have it's February and we have to give it back if we don't use it up by March 31st. So let's do something with this money. Hey, we can go to this rock climbing place and call it team development. That's okay, that's team development. It's a team development intervention, but it's not OD because it doesn't belong to that overall philosophy. You're not trying to do OD, you're just trying to burn some money. Then they say, determining feature of OD strategy is process used to arrive at strategy. I think what that means is that the philosophy behind the strategy, right, the philosophy of your OD program should reflect OD goals and values. So it's something about maximizing human potential and maximizing efficiency and effectiveness. The idea of integration, so they say that you need to use these 3 strategies in an integrated way. So the idea of integration is that your master plan should consider behavioral, structural, and technological strategies. You can't just do the behavioral one. But remember that a change in one subsystem will probably impact other subsystems because it's a system. And in fact, you may need to make changes in some other subsystem in order to allow you to facilitate change in the target subsystem. Example, so if you want to change technology and workflow, you may need to first change attitudes and values in order to allow that new technology, in order to help people accept it. So McDonald's staff would have to believe that customers are competent enough to bring in their own orders before those self-service terminals can be introduced. Unless you just boss them around and say, hey, these are the new terminals and this is your new job and you don't care what they think. And that can happen when you have minimum wage employees and a lot of turnover, but in organizations where you're hiring professionals, it does not work like that. You have to get buy-in. So the figure here is a little artificial. So there is in fact much more overlap between these classifications and their outputs than is suggested here. This looks very clean, right? It looks like behavioral strategies are about changing attitudes and values, and that leads to new behaviors. And structural strategies are about changing structures and design, and that leads to new relationships. And technological strategies are about changing production methods, and that leads to new processes. And all of these 3 things come together in improved performance. Well, changing structure isn't the only way that you change relationships. If you change workflows and if you change attitudes and values, that would also result in changes to relationships. Changing processes also changes behavior. Attitudes and values aren't the only drivers of behavior. So don't take this figure too seriously, and I'm not really planning to test you on it. So what does it offer? I think the useful message it conveys is that the change you want to see probably depends on the application of multiple strategies whose results will interact. Very often in life, fixing a problem means making another problem. Since an organization is a system that's made of interconnected subsystems, changing something in the target system is going to have some kind of ripple effect, will somehow impact other subsystems. So letting customers ring in their own orders means that now you have to have someone on staff to help people navigate the technology and reset it when they mess something up. So now you might have to hire for a new position. Yeah?
More money involved in something
now, like when you go and do your groceries and they have like self-service checkouts, they'll have like one person that's like the overseer, and then when you mess things up, you're like, help, and they come over.
Yeah.
So that's a technological change, but they also have to create some structural change by hiring someone for that position and training them. Yeah. But I assume that they save money on that, because imagine you were paying, I mean, at Walmart, they have one person for like how many of those terminals? Like 10 of them?
Yeah.
Superstore is fewer, but so they're paying one person probably minimum wage to oversee everyone doing their own, bringing in their own groceries. And imagine they would have had to have hired 10 people to do the same thing a bit more efficiently, but the customers will figure it out. You know, I'm getting good at that, bringing stuff in. It's kind of fun to find the barcode and make a copy. And a lot of companies are doing that now, so it must be working for them. So, structural change, right? It might mean that you need fewer people on staff, so you let some people go. Or maybe people are so good at ringing in their own orders and fetching their own drinks that you have all the staff you had before. Now you put them on making fries and burgers. And now you can serve 3 times as many people with the same staff. And that would impact other subsystems, right? And you need to have a strategy for that too. So these ripple effects will have impacts on the parts of the organization that you're aware of and that are overt to you. Now, plot twist, the parts of the organization, so it also has impacts on parts of the organization and how the organization works that are covert and hidden from you. This figure here leads you to consider that behavioral strategies answer to the goals and values subsystem, and structural strategies address the formal organizational structure, the structural subsystem, and then of course the last one is the technical subsystem, and we're missing 2 subsystems. Do you remember which ones we're missing? Yeah, there's 5.
Let's see. Goal is structure, psychosocial.
Ooh, I didn't see that one up there. So we have
goal is
values,
structure, technical, psychosocial.
That's a missing one.
And the big one, managerial.
Yes. And they are the ones that have power. So these are the 2 missing ones. So that these levels are where a lot of the hidden things are. Okay, that's where the cliques and the networks and the power games lie. That's about the decisions that are made behind closed doors. Your change program will interact with all that too. And an internal practitioner, an insider, will know about that kind of thing and can help you be aware of it. But as an external practitioner, you might not have that kind of knowledge of the organization. And we know that internal, external practitioner teams tend to be the best. The textbook provides this image of an iceberg. Behavior, structure, and technology are all things that you can see, right? You can look up the policies on the website and see that. You can see how people dress and hear what they say. And you can see what kind of computers they're using. And these are also things that the organization can talk about relatively freely. But then there's this whole informal organization that's under the surface. And if you're really naive, you think that the whole organization is what you see on the surface, and it's really not. Okay, so there's a whole informal organization that's under the surface. It's about the deep things and the invisible things, like culture, right? Culture is deep and invisible. Now, we've talked about power dynamics in class, and once you're aware of power dynamics and what they look like, it's kind of easy to see, right? But power dynamics are invisible to most people most of the time. Right? Most people don't recognize their behavior, other people's behavior as dominant or submissive. They just take it all for granted. They're following the scripts. It is the way it is. If you look at the things that are listed as under the surface in that figure, it's all that psychosocial stuff. And it's about power relationships between superiors and subordinates. And the quality of those relationships affect people's perception of trust and their willingness to be open, to take risks. All that said, stream analysis, which is a way of visually planning out your high-level strategy, does not have any columns for the invisible organization or the psychosocial strategies you need to use in order to manage it, or how you're going to get through the managers to get them to change their behavior or to give up their power or open their books. And maybe it should, okay? This only has the 3 visible ones. So this figure here is an example of stream analysis, and it shows, the figure shows what activities you do for each of your multiple strategies, so you can keep them all in mind and communicate them, and what time they spend. So you can see it has time on the, what is that, the y-axis? Yes, month. So it also shows interdependencies, so you can see them there with those arrows, and what that says under the behavioral column is that you can't create self-managed work teams without first doing some team building, and that covers how people work together in teams. And then you need to train teams to work well with other teams, and that's called intergroup team building. OD interventions are the specific activities that you undertake as part of the change program. Say, the team development activity or some kind of focus group or even a survey can be an intervention. I know you think of it as a measure, but once a survey goes out, it communicates something. It says, we care, we're watching. They have to be acceptable to the client. They should be reasonably appropriate to the culture. They should work, right? They should get the results you want and not be harmful. They're something that need to be acceptable to the client. Like, you talk to the client about what you're going to do. You wouldn't just go do it and have them show up there and be like, what the heck is this? You talk that one out first. And the results have to incorporate the fact that there are costs. So the results need to be greater than the costs. You also have to be aware of risks. So they should be worth the costs and the risks. There are 4 main levels for interventions to target, and that's the level of the individual and, say, dyads, like 2 individuals. Then there's the level of groups and teams, and then there's the level of groups interacting with other groups. And that highest level, you have that system level view of the whole organization, so 4 levels. Table 8.1 in your textbook summarizes, itemizes the most common OD interventions according to target level, going from individual to organization, and according to whether it's a behavioral, structural, or technological strategy. I'm not testing you on this, and you'll learn more about these interventions in later chapters. Right now there's a lot of words like Likert System 4 and action research that will make sense later. You can see the issue here with the classification system having a lot of overlap. So they put employee empowerment down as an individual intervention for all 3 categories of strategy: behavioral, structural, and technological. And why did they do that? See, it's there 3 times. And I guess that means that employee empowerment can be part of a behavioral intervention, part of a structural intervention, and part of a technological intervention. It's empower you to use the new technology. It's empower you to do your, new job, answer to your new boss, have more or less subordinates. Yeah. So there's a lot of repetition there. So job design is under team and under intergroup interventions. And what I imagine that means is that you can do job design at the team level, and you can do job design with a view to how different teams work together, maybe what people on each team are doing. Finally, I would like to draw your attention to the provider diagnostic form that's at the end of the chapter on page 191. That may be of interest to you as you work on your team project. So it prompts you to think through good questions like, who is the client? And why? And what are the problems? So you might find that helpful. That brings me to the end of this lecture. Are there any questions or comments about that? No, you're good? I don't see anything on chat. All right, I am going to stop the recording here.